In the next few posts, I'm going to go into detail in some of the features of GraphPad and how they're used by industry in order to help their business process. And so the first feature I'm going to go into is the library feature. And the first company that actually needed configurations done for them was a foundation company in Waco, Texas. Centex Foundation Company. And their business case was they needed to create accurate scale drawings of the foundation that they were going to level. And that was part of the proposal and then also part of the permitting process. And so what they would do is they'd actually go in, they'd have their form, they put in their customer information, but they would actually lay out the foundation series of lines. They'd of course make it accurate to the dimensions of the foundation itself. And then they would have a library of symbols, and we'll go over to our foundation symbols here. And they would say, okay, I need to add a 2x2 pier. Okay, so, I mean, that was great, but really what they were doing is they needed to lay these foundations evenly distributed along the foundation that they're going to level. And so let's back that out real quick. And so what I did to help them out was to allow them to select a line or a series of lines, and then if they selected a symbol at that point, it would then say, what is the maximum distance you want between those piers? We say 8 feet. If they hit calculate, it calculates the optimal distribution of those piers so that there's, the fewest number, 8 feet, no more than 8 feet apart. And if we go into dimensions and select point to point, we'll actually see that the optimal distance turned out to be 6 feet 8 inches. Now we'll notice it also calculated the number of piers in this table, and we'll talk more about that table in another video. But let's go into how these piers are set up and how the library works. So if we go into information, we actually see these items. We select one and we hit edit. Now we see the information on that particular library entry. It has a name. There's the symbol, the image symbol that it's stored under in GraphPad. We also have a cost associated with it. We have a width and a height, and we'll notice that it's got maintained scale on it and a scale. And this is a little needlessly complicated at this point. I need to boil it down to where the width and the height would be something like 2 feet 2 inches. And that would actually set the scale of it. So as we drop this item on the drawing, it would represent a 2x2 or 2x2 pier. And it'd be accurately sized. So no matter what we set the scale to, it would be the correct size. Now I added features to the library to make it easier to make changes, and so we can actually go through this entire category of symbols, all the foundation symbols, and we can see all the naming, etc. Anytime we made a change, you have to make sure that we saved it. But this shows how these symbols are managed. Another feature that I added as part of their business process, is say for example, they laid piers out along another line here. They calculated those piers, and they went back and they wanted to add piers here. Now we'll notice that there's a total of 7 piers that have been added. So this calculation takes into account that they've got piers along this line already. So when we actually select to add piers on there, we'll notice that it only added a single pier. And so that's one of the features that's built into GraphPad. Since I'm actually calculating the number of piers and where they're located, I can then determine whether or not there's existing piers that would conflict with these 2x2 piers that are being added. So really that's the first significant use case of the library feature in GraphPad. Now another use case, if we go to the City of New York, and I'll bring up their form, which is their New York City Preliminary Inspection Form. Let's look here, there we go, right there. And again, they've got a form, and I'll have a video just talking about the form itself. This is based on a PDF, but they have all the information that they need to capture. And they're going to lay out their symbols as well. Now, if we go over, I've got an email that actually shows this is what they're trying to accomplish here. And so they have these numbers that they add to it that show the type of problem that's located in that particular segment of sidewalk. So if we go back over into GraphPad, we'll see that I've got another library. If we touch twice, we'll actually get the list of libraries. And so I've got New York City sidewalk symbols. And let's take one of these symbols as an example. And what we'll do is we'll go to the eye, which allows us to edit these features and edit. And what we'll notice is that in this case I don't really have a name because I'm not going to be tabulating it as part of a table. I'm not going to have a cost associated with it. But I do have the ability to rotate and resize this feature, this symbol, and it's also non-proportional. It does not maintain scale, so it's always going to be the same size, and it's not countable, so it doesn't show up in any tables. Let's drop that symbol onto the drawing, and again we'll just draw a couple of lines just so we can get a perspective on it. So this would be, for example, our sidewalk, and let's set our scale here. So now if I drop that symbol onto it, we'll see it's a set size, but if I go into the points mode, we'll see I can actually rotate it and actually resize it, and when I resize it, I can resize it any way I want to. That's not really a behavior that they want. So what they can do to edit that, oops, hit the wrong button, New York City sidewalk symbols, we'll scroll to that 6A again, we'll hit edit, and that's where all these switches go in. So we don't really, it's a number and a letter combination, so rotating it doesn't really make any sense. We can leave resize on, but maybe we want to resize it so it's proportional and so it always looks like a 6A. So if we go back over, we'll delete this symbol and we'll drop it into place. And now, aha, we made our first mistake here. We need to hit save whenever we make a change. So if we hit this edit, we'll notice those changes weren't saved. Turn the rotate off, turn it into proportional, hit save. We'll back out that symbol, we drop it in again. We're in points mode, we can resize it, but it's only going to resize so it still looks like a 6A. And we're not going to be able to rotate that symbol. So that's a couple of additional features. All of these features, as we drop them in there, can be modified accordingly. So that's another feature of the library system that's built into it. I can create these libraries for you, but in these cases, you could actually go in and create that 6A on your own. Just basically type in the letter 6A, and we'll just delete this and show this really quickly. If we type in a text area, and we type in 6A, for example, close that out, and we want that a lot bigger, so what we'll do is we'll change the font to, I don't know, 70. Alright, so that's a nice big 6A. And now to create that 6A inside of our system on our own, we would just select it. Alright, didn't like that. Let's see again. We would just select that entity, and we'd hit copy group, and we say create image. The 6A is now in our image library. We go into our images, we see our 6A, and I could create another library and I could just copy it to the library that I wanted to. Copy to categories, set up my parameters, set my sizes, etc. and save it off into a library of my own making. Okay, so that shows how to create images and how images are used for two different business cases. Another business case is to use geometry, and what we'll do is we'll start another blank drawing here. And say, for example, we wanted to have, something as simple as this. And we'll drop in some dimensions on this. So we wanted to save this entity, and we could have some text associated with it. Type something in. We can actually save this geometry as well. And we would select that and hit create object. It shows up in our object library. Delete that off and drop it in. Now one thing to keep in mind is that when we save geometry, it's only going to save lines, arcs, curves, and text. And also, and fill areas as well. So this moves around, but it does not capture the dimensions. This is a feature that could probably change in the future, but it's the way it currently works. So we can actually, little segments of our drawing, for example, if we had some sort of geometry feature that we wanted to create, we could actually create those inside the library and store them as well. So these are the things that are open to the user to create. Now I've created some sample libraries which have features which are a little bit too complicated and cannot be made directly through the UI. And the first one I'm going to go into is my plumbing features. And what I'm going to do is I'll drop a plumbing feature on there, and I'll notice it has endpoints, and we can select those endpoints, and then we can actually move the symbol along with anything it's connected to. So that's a different type of feature, and so those endpoints are part of the symbol, and so if we, for example, rotated this, we'll notice that the points move and the connections move accordingly as well. That, unfortunately, any sort of feature that needs to behave in that fashion would have to be created by me personally. Let's delete everything in our drawing. Another part of the library is we can have, for example, these windows, and these work like mini forms. So we can drop it onto the drawing, and then if we go into text, and what we'll do is we'll zoom in on this first. And say, for example, we want to capture the dimensions of this window. This actually prompts us what those dimensions that we need are going to be, and then within our text form we could actually just put in those values associated with that. Again, this is basically just an image that's been created and it has text fields associated with it, but unfortunately this library feature is not something that can be created by the users themselves. The last portion that cannot be, let's just delete all this. The last library feature that can't be created is these tables. And so I've really provided two types of tables, but there's more that we could actually go into. This type is a summary table, and what it does is it actually, as we drop our symbols in, we'll go back over to our foundation symbols. As I drop a symbol in, you'll notice it's not sized the way we want it. That's a little bit better. It actually takes the name, populates it as the description, multiply and populates the cost of that peer, which was $200, multiplied times the number that I put in there, and gets a total. So this table and its interaction is something that's actually created in the software itself. It's something that can be used through the application, but cannot be created by the users. We can only have one table in a drawing at a time, so the other table that I provide with GraphPad is a legend, and so we'll go back over to our, since I have names only on my foundation symbols. As I drop these foundation symbols in, I can drop as many as I want in, but it'll only add a legend entry one time. It has an image of the symbol and then the actual name. This table works in the fashion it can be moved where it needs to be, and if you wanted to, you can actually delete any lines, etc. So those are pretty much describes all the features that are built into the library. That's one of the key features and what really enhances the application, and that's completely configurable. A lot is configurable, well, a lot can be configured by the user, although images with text that are part of like a mini form, that is something that I have to create myself. It's not open I don't have a user interface that actually allows you to do that. And the same thing with symbols, which have connections to lines, can be connected to lines and move with the lines. Those can't be created by the end users themselves. And lastly, of course, the tables, and those sometimes require actual programming modifications to the app itself in order to deploy a new table. And examples of calculations in tables are, for example, the CFM 50, which is an airflow calculation, which takes the area, multiplies it times, there's a calculation associated with the area, and then compares it to the number of people that can be in there, and then determines, based upon which criteria is more restrictive, what the airflow is that's required, so you can set up the number of fans, etc. And that's really my presentation on the library feature. All of this is stuff that can be configured or can be created through a contract with me, or in the case of simple images and geometry with text, those users can create themselves. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much.